Good evening. My name is Rob Lydon, and I'm a Director Emeritus here at the Center. I'm pleased to welcome you to the 8th Chatham Marconi Speaker Series presentation of 2025. What was the need for a target ship, and why was it put to Cape Cod Bay? Perhaps you have your own stories of seeing the SS James Longstreet out in Cape Cod Bay in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. Tonight, we'll learn the true story of the ship, discover what it was used for, and facts about it that few know. Historian and Cape Codder Peter Schwind will provide us with all the information as well as discuss little-known stories about the Longstreet, the ship's final days, and its current status. Peter was raised in Eastham, Massachusetts. He's a son of Phil, a well-known fisherman and author, and Helen, a library trustee and maker of the famous Berry Slicker and other candle products. Peter attended Eastham Grammar School and Orleans High School and eventually left the Cape to pursue an engineering career with Polaroid Corporation, returning to the Cape in 1978 and then started commercial fishing in 1988. At the present time, he's a commercial fisherman and summer resident of Eastham. Following the presentation, Peter will answer your questions. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Peter Schwind.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, for inviting me and all the folks here at the Marconi Museum. He already stole some of my thunder in terms of my name is Peter Schwind. I did grow up in Eastham, Massachusetts. My dad was very well known here on the Cape, partly because, among other things, he wrote an article in the Cape Cod for over 35 years. A lot of folks read his articles. So I want to thank Rob, and I want to thank my daughter Suzanne for being my computer person. She really keeps me on track. Let's just say that. Okay. I did attend the Eastham Grammar School. How things have changed. My first grade class, there was myself and 4 girls. I couldn't spell. I still can't spell. The girls taught me how to cheat. They got me through first grade. I then went on to the Orleans High School, where there were 3 towns, Brewster, Eastham, paid tuition for the students to go to the Orleans High School. There were 20 in my graduating class. So that was 3 towns. So you can see things have changed. I did leave the Cape in 1955 to go to Northeastern, and then I ended up working for Polaroid most of my working career. And that's the beginning of the story. I'm going to tell you more of the story later on. Or as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. So I returned here, of course, with vacations. My folks lived there. I built a summer place in 1978 next to my dad's house. He gave me the land, very generous of him. And as Rob said, in 1988, I bought my own little 23-foot fishing boat. I trailer it, been all over the Cape for 3 or 4 years. A few years ago, we were fishing off of Chatham. That's where all the fish were. So you move around to wherever the best fishing is. At least you hope it's the best fishing. Okay, it's kind of a funny story. My cousin called me one day and she said, I understood it to say there was a graduate student doing a paper on the target ship. And did I have some slides, some pictures that I could share? So, phone number. So I called it. It turned out to be the Eastham Historical Society. And I got together with them, showed them what I had, and I made the mistake of telling some of my stories. So the next thing I know, they asked me to do a presentation. So I knew a lot, but there was a lot that I didn't know. So I've done a lot of research on the internet, pulled a lot of information together, a lot of pictures from different resources. Actually, Noel Bile, who some of you may know, actually wrote 3 books, 2 pamphlets and a book on the target ship. And those booklets, probably 50% of what I'm presenting tonight came from those booklets. So he did a great deal of research. So I've given that presentation over there 4 times for Eastham. So I'm glad to be here tonight to share. And I do have stories. I hope you like them. There's only a few pictures of the ship, so if I just showed the pictures for the ship, we'd be out of here in 10 minutes. Okay. I grew up in Eastham. This is the house I grew up in, the red house there. This picture was taken in 1947. Notice that there are no telephone poles, because we grew up without electricity or a telephone. And the next picture is kind of dramatic. This was taken last year, same place, standing exactly in the same place. And if you look over in the left-hand corner, you can just see one of the windows of the barn. So that's what's happened since 1947. Unfortunately, I held on to the place for quite a long time, but I recently sold it, and folks have decided to tear it down and build a new house. So that's the way things go. The next shot, that's the house I grew up in. The next shot is the barn. If you've driven down Samoset Road in Eastham toward First Encounter Beach, you will encounter that barn. It sits 5 feet from the pavement. There's a story about that, which is for another night. Okay. My dad moved to Eastham during the Depression. He was planning to write short stories. He had gone to BU in journalism, but you have to eat. So he decided to raise turnips, and he had spent times down here in the summer with his grandparents. So he knew how to go down to what I call the West Shore. Everyone else calls it the First Encounter Beach, down in Cape Cod Bay, walk out at low tide on the flats. If you know anything about the bay, you know that you can walk out about a mile. He would scratch quahogs, put a bushel of quahogs on his back, weighed 90 pounds, turn around, walk ashore, drop the quahogs, go back and scratch another bushel. Well, on a good tide, he could do 2, maybe 3 bushels. So someone said to him, "Gee, Phil, if you had a boat, you could buoy up the quahogs and then go out at the high tide and just pull them up. You wouldn't have to carry them the mile ashore, and you'd have more time to scratch." So he started doing that. And then they found out that there were soft-shell clams on Billingsgate Island that were worth a lot more money. And I think in the beginning, he and his partner rode a dory from what I call Bees River, officially Herring River, over to Billingsgate Island to dig soft-shell clams. Well, quickly they got a boat with an engine in it. He noticed these splashes. What in the world are these splashes? They were striped bass. They were worth 50 cents a pound. So that started a very long shell fishing and fishing career for my dad. I started early. As you can see, that boat's in the backyard. It's pretty safe. And then the next picture, I'm doing crab potting. I don't remember ever catching any crabs, but I sure had a lot of fun. The next picture shows me in the white shirt there, the white t-shirt on my dad's boat, the Nani. That's the boat that he started taking. What he found out was that there was a lot more money taking people fishing than there was in catching fish. So in 1948, he started taking charters. So he would take 4 people on that boat, $10 a piece, and that started his chartering career. So he moved on to this boat, the White Cap. There's me as mate in the stern. I made it for him a few years. The next picture shows the White Cap in the final version. He raised the bow. I did not get to enjoy it. I had gone off to college by that time. But what happened was, I was his right-hand man. I was the only son. So as soon as I could walk and talk, I helped him wherever it was possible. So when you do that, you learn a lot. If you keep your mouth shut and learn. So, and that's what happened. Okay, I'm trying to catch up here. Oh, I just want to mention one thing. I'm a little bit like Elizabeth Warren. Everything I know about the target ship, my father told me. He was known to embellish his stories, but I promise everything I'm going to tell you tonight is true. Okay, I have a question. The official name of this boat is the SS James Longstreet. Anybody in the Navy can't answer, but anybody knows what the SS stands for? Well, I'll tell you, it's steamship. I would have bet you $1,000 that there was a diesel in that boat. But when I started doing the research, I found out that it was actually a steamship. There was a steam engine in there. Okay, this shows a British lifeboat. If any of you were around during World War II, I can remember on the outer beach, there was never a time that you didn't see smoke where a freighter had been torpedoed. The German U-boats sunk 1,000 freighters in 1940. And they just stood off the coast here, and every vessel that came along, they sank. So this is a lifeboat that came ashore. The Coast Guard was very busy taking cameras and film because you weren't supposed to take a picture. But my mother snuck a picture and managed to keep it. The next picture is myself and my sister waving at a blimp. They were on patrol to try to spot the German subs. That's what they were doing. Okay. So what happened is, initially the United States was not at war with Germany or Japan. So Britain was. So Britain asked for our help. And we had all the materials and stuff that they needed, but no one had the freighters, the ships, to transport it to them. So the Maritime Commission was tasked with building a low-cost freighter that could be built very quickly to supply materials basically to England at the start of the war. Actually, Britain hired the U.S. to build 50 of these Liberty ships. The design was after a British ship called the Empire Liberty, so the original name was Liberty, but if you read the history, you find that these Liberty ships were actually credited with our freedom because they were able to transport so much material and troops to where they were needed in the war that they're given credit for actually helping us win the war. So they were dubbed the Liberty because of that fact. Franklin Roosevelt reviewed the plans, made the comment that they were ugly ducklings. The name stuck, but they finally persevered and called them Liberty ships. So this is an active ship. It's in Baltimore, the John W. Brown. It took, I have to look at my notes, 75,000 volunteer hours to restore it back in 1991. And it's been converted for a school so that they take cruises, part of education, something, I'm not quite sure exactly what, but it's in Baltimore. It's actively running. There is another ship in San Francisco, the Jeremiah O'Brien, and that's still in pretty much the original configuration. There are two other ones that I know about. One was given to Greece, and there's one up in Alaska that provides the power, the electrical power for a tannery up there, believe it or not. So from 1941 to 1945, there were 18 shipyards in the United States that were tasked with building these ships. At the end of the war, the average time from keel laying to launch was 20 days, averaging 3 launches a day. Originally, there was 2,750 ships planned. They actually built 2,711. There was a workforce over 1.5 million people. There was one that burned at the dock. 200 were lost to enemy or storms. So the SS James Longstreet was built by the Todd Houston Shipbuilding Corporation in Texas. And just to give you a feel for these Liberty ships, they were 440 feet long. That's 1.5 football fields. They were 56 feet wide, which is a third the width of a football field. They weighed 7,000 tons, but they could carry 10,000 plus tons of cargo. Just to give you an idea, they could carry 2,840 Jeeps. If those Jeeps were on a freight train, it would be 2 1/3 miles long. And the same thing, they could carry tanks, 440 light tanks, 260 medium tanks. And by the way, during the war, these ships typically were grossly overloaded. So I don't really know how much they could carry. They were rated for 10,000 tons. Okay, now we have an aerial view of a typical ship. Just point out, sorry, I'll leave the mic. You can see the gun turrets up here, the anti-aircraft guns, and in the front there are anti-aircraft guns. So for those folks at home, I just pointed out where the guns were located on the ship. So now the next question is, how many remembers this next slide? Anybody remember? It's the Henry J. Kaiser Coupe, 1954, I believe it was built. Why is it important? Well, the next slide, Henry J. Kaiser. Next slide. I'll let you read that. He introduced 2 new concepts to shipbuilding. One was basically welding, where everything in the past had been riveted, and to construct very large subassemblies off-site and then bring everything together. There were, I'm just trying to see, this is just what I said, 18 shipyards. Okay, why don't we move on soon? Just to let you know, there were 250,000 subassemblies. Some of those subassemblies weighed as much as 240 tons. So here's a diagram of a typical ship. In the center was the house where all the offices and everything, living quarters and all that stuff was located. You can see there were 5 holes. In the center is the steam engine, and there were 2 boilers that provided steam. The engine weighed 170 tons. Pretty big steam engine. Move on, Sue. Okay, this is the SS James Longstreet. Okay. Kaiser settled in Richmond, California, which is on San Francisco Bay. He had 4 yards. He had over 93,000 workers. 27% were women. He provided training, housing, and free health care. That health care system that he had was the largest and only free health care plan at the time in the country. Those yards produced 747 ships, including 519 Liberty ships. And it's kind of an interesting story I read the other day. A woman was visiting, and he was giving her a tour. And he said to her, "Would you like to christen a Liberty ship?" And she said, "Yes." So he goes to his cabinet, gets a bottle of wine. They walk over to one of the yards. Well, there was nothing there. There was trash. She said, I don't see a ship. He said, "Start swinging." Implying that by the time she swung, the ship would be there. That was a slight exaggeration. He did build a ship in 4 days, I forget exactly, 14 hours and some odd minutes. It was a publicity stunt that was not typical. That was from the time they laid the keel to the time they launched it, 4.5 days. Typically, it was 20 days. The ships were 85% complete when they were launched. Then they had to be outfitted and sea trials. They all had to pass the sea trial. The Longstreet had 3 voyages. I think the next page we see where they went. Well, this is the details. Cost was $1.8 million. By the way, it's really difficult to name 2,700 ships. If you had $2 million, you could get to name your own Liberty ship. Interestingly, look at the diameter of the cylinders, 24.5 inches, 37 inches, and 70 inches with a stroke of 48 inches. They chose the steam engine because it wasn't complicated and it didn't require precise machining, because at this time steam turbines had come into vogue, but that required a much higher degree of machining, and there were very few folks that could produce the turbines. Any machine shop could make the steam engine. So they chose the steam engine because it was easily made. The ship was named after this general. Maybe the next slide, everyone's read that. He was the right-hand man of Robert E. Lee. He got blamed for the loss at Gettysburg. His second wife spent her life defending his reputation, and I think she was successful. It turned out that he did exactly what was asked. Okay, so these are the voyages. Second and third voyage were round trips to Liverpool. And by the way, the German subs sat in all the shipping lanes. So if you wanted to get torpedoed, you went in the shipping lane. So if you didn't want to get torpedoed, you avoid all the shipping lanes. So these ships all had to take devious routes, areas where the German subs wouldn't be looking. So they took them a lot longer to get where they were going. But what happened at the end of the third voyage, she was outside of New York Harbor and got caught in a northeast gale and got blown ashore at Sandy Hook, New Jersey. So there she is on the sand. The next picture shows her crew coming off. Now, she had merchantmen that ran the ship, and they had an armed guard, a Navy armed guard, who was responsible for defending the ship. What happened is that she was supported in the middle, not supported in the ends, so she cracked. There was a crack that was 7 or 8 inches wide, and it broke all the steam lines. Basically, she was a total loss. They deemed they could not repair it and have a safe ship. The Liberty ships did have a problem with cracking. It was blamed on poor welding, but it was actually a lady metallurgist that discovered it was because it was the cold waters of the North Atlantic. The steel they used became brittle, and that's why the ships cracked. Not this case. In this case, it was because it grounded. So the Navy wanted it. They actually, a month later, they dug a channel and refloated it. They came in and made temporary repairs and floated the ship. Okay, before she came to Cape Cod, she was used for 2 different test target programs. First the Pelican and the second was the Bat. They both were guided radar missiles fired from an aircraft, and those programs were given up after a regular cargo ship got fired at accidentally. It wandered into the restricted zone. Pilots, it was at night, fog, pilot could only see on his radar. He fired his missile. Luckily, the missile missed. But they gave it up at that time. Next slide, sir. Okay, here she is adrift. November, December 1944, she broke free. They lost it. It took them a month to find it. They towed it back. And by the way, she was so badly damaged, they had to keep making repairs to it. And I'm not sure where they brought it to, I think Baltimore, but she sank. She sank in the harbor. So in the meantime, now we're getting back to Polaroid. I worked for Polaroid for a long, long time, 30 years. I never knew they were involved in the war. But it turned out Dr. Land was a personal friend of General Patton. And in fact, there were many things that were done. Too many to list. If you want to know, I have a good book, one of my references, details everything that was done. But one of the programs that he was asked to work on was a program called Dove. The Dove was a program where they wanted bombs to be infrared sensitive so that it could sense the presence of a ship. And because when you drop a high altitude bomb, most of them would miss. And the ships actually were able to avoid. So they wanted basically a heat sinking bomb. And just as an aside, from his research that he did, later on, Sparrow and Sidewinder missiles that we have today were a direct result of the research that he did. So they had done testing at Monomoy and Wellfleet, but they needed a real ship. So there's two questions that always come up. Why did the Navy need a ship? Well, they needed the ship to at the request of Dr. Land, for a ship that would simulate a real ship. Why did they pick Cape Cod Bay? Well, they needed a location because they knew the ship was going to sink. So they needed a location that had a shoal of about 20 feet. And they didn't want to put it anywhere in the ocean because they were afraid the ocean waves would quickly destroy the ship. So they found a shoal in the middle of Cape Cod Bay, 3.5 miles off the East Ham coast, the Newfound Shoal, which they decided to put this ship in. So they towed it to Boston. They had 10,000 55-gallon drums in it to keep it afloat. They stripped it of everything of value. And then they towed it into late April of 1945. 4 tugs brought it into Cape Cod Bay. I have an interesting story. There was a lot of communication back. Some of you guys here in Chatham know there was communication, but there were some women in Orleans that had an inside track. They heard the Navy was going to bring the ship in. So they went to First Encounter Beach, looking out. Sure enough, they could see this huge ship coming in. Well, the information they had was that the Navy was going to blow it up. So all of a sudden, they got worried that the explosion would break their car windows. So they rolled down the windows. They sat there for 4 hours waiting for the explosion. They got really cold. They went home. It never did get blown up. So the Navy spent 3 days aligning this. I think we can maybe go to the next slide soon. No, okay. They wanted to align it exactly north and south. So what happened is the wind came up in the middle of the night and she sank. So she sank right on top of the shoal the way she lies today. The tugs came back in the morning, found it had already sunk. Their official report said that they scuttled it at 9:46 in the morning, and they went home. Task completed. So it's been there since April of 1945. Okay, at the end of the war, what happened during the wartime, they gave the use of a couple of B-24s to Dr. Land, some 1,000-pound bombs that had flour in them. And now at this time it was all vacuum tubes. So he did experiments and he would drop 2 bombs, one with his device and one without, so they could see if his device improved the accuracy of the ship. So they had installed in Boston before they brought it in 75 to 100 heaters, the same kind of heaters that are used in an orchard when people worry about the frost and so forth. They had a lot of diesel fuel aboard. So they actually put in originally 2 Navy personnel, and then later on 2 Coast Guard personnel on. This is during the wartime, to make sure that that oil didn't disappear. So when they were going to bomb it, they would send a boat out, take the people off. They would drop their bombs and then put the people back. Okay. Okay, here we go. During my childhood, this was what was used. It was a 12-inch cast iron bomb. It had a smoke charge in it, so that when it hit the ship, there was a flash of light and a puff of smoke, so the pilots could tell whether they hit the ship or not. Okay, obviously they did nighttime bombing. They set flares up. Okay, this is a picture from the rock at Rock Harbor. Is just to the left. This is looking out at the ship. Everyone says, oh, see how high she's floating. No, it was low tide. The tide was down. A lot more of the ship was visible. So she was on that shoal, never moved after they put it there. So people would see the tide up and they say, oh, you know, well, she's low now. No, the tide just came in. There's a 10-foot rise and fall of the tide in Cape Cod Bay. Okay, so I have a story. We had an iceman growing up because we didn't have electricity. We had an ice box, and his name was Tom Brown. And what would happen is he knew exactly the size of our ice box. He would cut a block of ice. He'd throw it on his back. He had a big leather thing. He'd come in the house. Our instructions were to leave the door open. He never knocked. He just came in, went into the kitchen, put the ice cube in the ice box, turned around and walked away. Well, he had a son, and his son wrote this story. And I quote, as a boy, I had many visits and meals aboard her, i.e. the target ship. As a Cape Cod native from Eastham, I was very friendly with a man named John Curtis Curtin, who owned a double-ender motor launch. He took me many times to the SS James Longstreet in 1945 and 46. We would go aboard to meet the crew, first the Navy and later, I believe, the U.S. Coast Guard, for a meal of steak and eggs. What a thrill for a boy of 15 to have steak when meat was rationed near the end of the war. The crew was always glad to receive Curtin in his double-ender, as he would smuggle booze to them in return for the steaks in the meal. So that's funny, my dad had a partner named Curtin, and I believe it was the same Curtin. And my first memory of fishing in Cape Cod Bay was from that double-ender. So now we're moving along in 1950, and in 1960, another story. There were all kinds of stories. Once the war ended, the Dove program moved. Dr. Land talked Kodak into taking it over. So the need for a ship that was warm disappeared. So the Navy, and I believe the Army, and I'm not sure who else, used it to train their pilots. So what happened is they abandoned the ship. Well, I hate to say it, but there were folks from Cape Cod that went aboard and took whatever they could take, including one summer. There was a fellow that owned a junkyard. He had a big 40-foot Novi, and all summer long you could see an acetylene torch where he was cutting stuff and loading up his boat. I assume he was selling that as scrap metal. So he worked out there all one summer at night. Nobody ever bothered him. I heard that there were boats that came as far away as New Bedford to take advantage of the diesel oil. I'm not sure that's true, but the local fleet certainly did. Always questions. Did any bombs land on the land? Yeah, they sure did. This 12-inch bomb, although it was cast iron, was relatively light. So it would get stuck in the chute. I think my theory is, don't know it's true, my theory is that the pilots would release it, it wouldn't fall. But the planes were circling, they're banking, the vibration, the bombs would fall out. I know we had one fall across the street from our house. And I do know the pilots were instructed not to fly over a house and not to fly over a boat. So there's lots of reports. And later on, when they started using larger bombs, there's more reports, and I know that the people in Orleans have some souvenirs of 100-pound bombs that were dropped. Okay, 1970. So these are just slides that I've had from different sources, some of mine. Shows the deterioration of the ship over time. The question is, was anybody ever injured? Well, my dad would never let me aboard because the way you got aboard was to climb up the bomb holes. So they were jagged and rugged and you could easily get cut. But there were some boys in 1970 that went aboard, 5 of them. They carried home 5 bombs. And to make a long story short, one of them exploded when he was cleaning it out, and he lost a finger. But as far as I know, that's the only person that was actually ever injured from ordnance exploding. Did they lose any planes? I know of 2 incidences, one where a single plane went down, and I just on Lower Cape TV, there's an interview that the lady did with me, and it turned out that there was evidence that when this plane came down, a wing came off. So the plane crashed, the pilot was lost. The Navy came in with the big barge and a derrick and all that stuff. My dad went over to them and said, "Would you like to know where your plane is?" Because he had seen it come down. They said, "Hey, this is a military matter. Mind your own business." They hunted for 3 days. They couldn't find the ship. They couldn't find the plane. So he went over and he said, "Would you like to know where your plane is now?" And they said, they said yes. There had been a big oil slick come up where the plane was, and my dad knew exactly where it was, so he took them over to it. Another case where one of the training is they had to train to navigate, they had to train to fly in tight formation, they had to train to dive bomb on the ship. So sometimes they got too close. So there were 2 planes that collided in Northeastham and they came down. One pilot was saved, one pilot was not. The ship was a target of a lot of graffiti. There were a group of 5 teenagers. In 1966, they bought a copy of Playboy magazine, a gallon of white paint, and they snuck out late at night. And they painted on the side of the boat a picture of the Playboy bunny. And I understand that was clearly visible from the Eastham shore. I didn't happen to see it, but there was always a lot of graffiti on it, trust me. I had a fellow in my department that had a cruising boat, and he cruised down to Wellfleet, and he came back and he said, "My God," he said, I'm in the middle of Cape Cod Bay and I almost got run down by this freighter." I said, "Max, I hate to tell you, that ship hasn't moved an inch." So if there was a collision, it would have been your fault. But you can see, this is taken in 1990. The top size is really deteriorated. So here's another story. There's a fellow by the name of Robert Finch. He's in Wellfleet. I understand he's a fairly well-known author. I don't happen to know of him, but this is his story. He said, "You know that forest of plants that was growing up there on the decks?" He said, "Well, some of them were funny plants." "Funny plants? How to?" "Well," he continued, "about 40 years ago, this was written quite a while ago, a friend of mine called me one evening and asked me to take him out to the target ship in my boat. This was in October. I asked him why, and he said, 'Never mind, I just need to get out there.' So I took him out. It was some cold out there with a stiff breeze out of the northwest. He climbs up the side of the hull using the bomb holes. Well, he goes up, and I'm sitting there freezing. And after a while, he comes down and hands me some plants. They had points on them, funny plants. Said I, 'Oh, no, you don't. I'm not getting caught with these on my boat.' And he says, 'Come on, man, there's supposed to be a frost tonight.' Can you believe that? Growing weed on a U.S. government property in an officially restricted zone." So there I am. My dad had a 20-foot workboat. We did some fishing after I came down here, as I said, in 78. So we were out there one night coming in, and he said, "Turn on the lights." I said, "How do you turn on the lights?" He said, "Hold the bare wires against the terminal of the battery." So I'm holding the wires against the terminal of the battery to turn the running lights on. It was rough. The spray was coming. Every time I got hit with spray, I got a shock. I'd let go of the wires. He yelled at me, "Turn on the lights." I wired the boat up. After that, we had real switches to turn on the lights. Okay, now the next series of slides are actually from my personal collection. I'm still using that fishing rod you see there. A lot of my slides had a sailboat. my theory is that that fellow, there's a sailboat there, was doing commercial lobster diving, but it was there in a lot of my slides. Okay, when I left in '55, they were still using the cast iron bombs, but they were also using .50 caliber machine guns and rockets. You can see the machine gun bullets hit the water and ricochet. You can see the rockets hit the water and ricochet. But the planes always started from the land and aimed out towards sea. So in the early 1970s, and someone told me it was exactly 1970, I'm not sure, the bombing increased dramatically. All day, all night, in the afternoon, many times at night. So people started complaining. So the politicians got involved and the military agreed to stop using the Longstreet. Many of the bases were closing, and the big problem was they started using jets. So the jets were so much faster, it was deemed now to be a safety hazard, even though the ship was 3.5 miles off the shore. So you can see it's a lot of damage. So everyone wants to know, in 1996 it disappeared, so everyone wants to know why. So I just a couple of pictures to show that we do get ice there in the bay in the wintertime, sometimes, not every year. But there's a typical ice flow that was there. So my belief is that there was a similar one in '96, and that ice moving with the tide basically shaded at the waterline. Because the next slide, well, I want to thank this fellow, he's from Eastham. He took a bunch of drone pictures this past April, and he's given me quite a few of his pictures to use. So we start off, this is a view. You can see on the left, that pile is the anchor chain, and you can see the two of the masts, and some stuff that's the stuff that's light colored is all above the water. So these were taken at dead low tide. So next zoom. So you can see the anchor chain there. So it's just below the surface of the water at low tide. Another shot of midships. There's a shot of the stern. So there's another shot, I think, of the stern. So you can see all the ribs sticking up. So can you imagine running a fiberglass boat on those at the right time of the tide? Might do a little damage. That's looking, I'm sorry it's off the top of the screen, but first thing on the beach is over to the left. So the next slide, or maybe I missed it. Oh, there's first thing on the beach. And the next slide. One of those slides shows the buoy. My point is the buoy is like 400 feet away from the ship. Oh, there we go. So, you know, this is the bow, that's the stern. So that's the buoy that marks the location. So if you think the ship is right next to the buoy, you're in big trouble. They do that because when there's a ship above the surface, you have to move the buoy away from the ship so that the angle of view is greater. If you put it really close to the ship, you know, the angle might be like 180. So by moving it away is a larger angle. Very dangerous. So the next picture was taken by Noel. He spent weeks with a new camera, hundreds of rolls of film to get this shot. So thank you very much. And now I'll answer any questions that people might have. I see a hand up. Yes, sir?
You talked about petroleum being on the ship, or fuel oil, I guess. Is that, any of that still there, or did it all go away somehow over the years?
I believe the dragging fleet removed most of it. In fact, there was something in that oil, so it damaged the injectors on the diesels. So you could tell who had been aboard and taken oil and who hadn't, because their diesels all smoked. But obviously it's all gone now. Any other question? Do we have any Zoom questions, sir?
Not so far.
Okay. Well, it's been my pleasure. I was out there today catching striped bass just right off that ship. So some of my family here in front were with me today. It was kind of rough out there. Well, thank you all for coming.